Hi there, welcome back. This is me, Tom, just talking about the Delta Paper 2 now. I'm just giving you a few tips and summary of your performance on the exam. First one is task 1. This is worth an 18 marks, so again, quite a lot of marks here. This one, some people have a lot of problems with this. And the key here is to analyze the context very, very carefully. Remember, no test is inherently good or bad, but tests need to be fit for purpose. So you really need to look at the test and look at the context in which it's going to be used, and is it fit for purpose if you think it's valid or reliable in that particular context. So um, well, one of the things that people make the mistake of doing here is that the headings that they use are things like validity, content validity, reliability, using the actual the terms themselves as headings. Rather than that, I would suggest using the terminology in the learner application. So you might want to say, for example, you might give one of the positive um, one of the one of the positive things could be fresh starts. So the title would be fresh starts, and the explanation would be, so there are 3 tasks. So each the learner would have 3 different opportunities to demonstrate his or her speaking ability, and then your learner application would be, well, this would make the test more reliable, and give a clear indication of the learners speaking over 3 distinct tasks. So try and use the terminology, but don't put the terminology into the headings themselves. Try and get some distinct areas of positive or negative aspects of the test, and then give a very, very clear application for the learner. Um, if you're in any doubt, I would read the Delta Handbook here, so get a really clear indication of what constitutes a high level response. But overall, I think you did pretty well. Task 2, again, this is worth a huge portion of the marks. And this is kind of reverse engineering materials design. So understanding how materials writers put together material is crucial here. So the first one is thinking about purposes, and rather than describing the activities in task 2 part A, make sure that you're writing purposes. So the purpose is like the stage aim of your lesson plan rather than the procedure. So for example, it might be um, exercise A would be to activate schemata. Exercise B could be to encourage prediction. Exercise C could be to encourage global understanding if it were to be a listening, something like that. So think clearly about the purpose rather than the procedure would be my advice. In part B, thinking about combinations of activities. So this is thinking about sequences. So rather than individual activities, how activities are designed in terms of sequences. So mention both activities here. So for example, part A is related to part B because, or part A does burp, and part B will burp. Yeah, so make sure, I hope I'm not. I hope you understand what I'm saying here. Make sure you mention 2 activities in your response. Okay, and you've got to be really explicit in that sense. Make sure you're talking about sequences and relationships between activities rather than single activities. And a lot of you fell down there because you didn't quite talk about the sequences. You just identified purposes of single activities. Part C, we've got this idea of assumptions, explanations of an assumption, and you need to mention the activity. So if you look in the model answers that I gave you, it's kind of there's a fairly generic way of answering this question. So assumption 1 might be, and the chunk that you might use is something like students learn better when, or students might learn more effectively when, or learners need to, or learners should. Okay, so that's your assumption. And then your explanation of the assumption would be this is because, or um, the authors might think that, or one reason for this assumption is. So make sure that you are clear in your headings here, and make sure that the examiner can very, very clearly find the assumption behind the activity, the reason behind the assumption, and then mention the activity itself. Again, if you're unclear about this, try reading the model answers and the exam reports. But this is not a difficult exercise, and most of you did pretty well here. But try to get, don't be so superficial in your assumptions and reasons behind the assumption. So really get into the into the mind of the course book writer here, and why they would use this activity, what would be the assumption behind that choice of activity. Again, you shouldn't really have any problems with this. You're all very, very versed in theory and practice of ELT, so you shouldn't have any problems with this. The final one, this is quite a strange one because there are only, this is worth 40 marks, and there are only, and you get 2 marks for every point made, but there is a maximum of 30. So the way to think about this is not the same as task 1, task 5, paper 1. So in task 5, paper 1, you just have to write as many points as you can. This is slightly different because what you need to do is you need to balance breadth and depth here. And often this would be the difference between a distinction and a merit, or a merit and a pass. So what you need to do here is you need to make you need to make 15 really, really good points. You get 2 marks for each of those, so quality rather than quantity, but also back up those points with depth. Now, the depth is basically giving examples to theories, to different contexts, to sources. So this is really where you can show off to the examiner your breadth and depth of reading here. So thinking about, mentioning Krashen, mentioning Michael Lewis, mentioning theories such as audio-lingual approach, communicative approach, um, and I think you've got to be careful with this, with the balance between breadth and depth. Don't just write lots and lots and lots of points, because, as I say, there is a maximum of 30 points for the number of points, and each point is worth 2 marks. So you're only going to get 2 marks for 15 points. Does that make sense? So um, that's about it, really. I mean, what I would do is be really clear on what you have to do in terms of task demands of each task. They're very straightforward. There's no real kind of tricks in the Delta exam. It's all fairly straightforward. You just have to hope that you get a fair paper, which is normally the case because it goes through lots and lots of different um, there's lots of processes and procedures which are involved in ensuring fairness and standardization of tests. So you should be okay. If you've got any questions, please let me know, and I wish you all the best in the exam. I'm sure you'll all do very, very well. Keep your eye on the clock. Make sure you're going through the exam at a reasonable pace, and just hopefully you can remember some of these tips. Thank you.